Today's topic, thinning out sounds. The question you should be asking, why and when would I want to do this? Because typically we're talking about adding to sounds. It's usually the sexier thing is the additive approach. So how to make something fatter, how to make something grittier, how to make something cut through. These are all expressions I'm sure you've heard before, and they are useful and things you need to know and techniques and strategies that you will use. But just as common, the opposite is true, where you need to take a sound that is already beefy and heavy and cutting through and potentially thin it out so that the overall production sounds better. And that's what we're going to be focused on. I've been making some videos and tutorials over the last year. I don't know if they're ever going to see the light of day, but it's a lot of, producing from zero to the end. And what I found in doing that is it's amazing how many times I'm thinning things out. It's more than I remember doing in the past. And maybe it's because my ears are better. I don't know. But I wanted to look at that and talk about that here. And it usually happens in one of two contexts. So the first context is your busy production. So your pop music from maybe like 10 years ago, where it was just tracks and tracks and tracks and tracks and tracks, and there was a limited amount of room to cram all those instruments and sounds in, and you had to be pretty aggressive with kind of how you would EQ and process your sounds to make sure everything could fit together. Nowadays, with things not being quite so dense and it's a lot sparser in terms of instrumentation, at least in popular music, we're looking at thinning sounds out more in the context of layering and cohesion. That's the example that we're going to look at here, but the same techniques and ideas are going to apply if it's the first context as well. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Thinning out sounds. Here we go. Let's go ahead and listen to our parts for context. So the first thing we have are some drums. Then we have our strings from Labs, and we can just take a quick look at the settings. There's 0 reverb on. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And the release is pretty much cranked all the way up. So let's take a listen. And then we also have our diva here. Okay, so let's take a listen to this one. And this actually sounds very funky. It doesn't sound very similar to the original patch. So I'm going to bring that back in really quick so we can hear that. And then all together, if we're listening with the original diva, this is what it sounded like. And this is why I felt the need to have to thin out one of the sounds. And it ended up being the diva sound. So all together. So if I'm being perfectly honest, that doesn't sound that bad. It's just that we have a couple things occupying a ton of space in the low mids. And that's an area that can get built up very, very quickly. And then you really just don't have room for anything else. So that was the reason why when I listened to those two parts, I asked myself and I said, okay, what do I need to take the precedence? And to make it more of a challenge for myself, I said the strings. So I wanted to make sure that this diva patch doesn't lose all of its character and charm that it has. But I also want to make sure when you're listening through that you don't ever lose the organic, natural sounding string ensemble. So when making that determination, I added on a couple of plugins to the strings to get us started. This one's actually just here so that I can grab an analyzer inside of Diva, but I have a compressor and then I have a limiter. So let's listen to it with those on. And I really just like this, not necessarily for the compression, but for the fact that I can have this mono maker and adjust the stereo width right from down there. So that's bringing things kind of front and center. Obviously, those samples are very stereo. It's probably recorded on an actual stage, but for the sake of this production, I need to push things a little bit more to the middle and for this example. So now with Diva, we can hear the end result of, adjusting the patch before we do any of the processing. So let's listen to that first, and then we'll get into the processing and talk about what we've done. So definitely a lot brighter. Obviously, as you could tell, we adjusted the cutoff, but it's still occupying tons in those low mids, and we're starting to lose the sound of those organic strings. So the first thing that you're asking yourself is, well, can I just adjust the volume? And I can. But now this is really doing almost nothing. I can't really even hear the patch. It's filling in some of the space, and maybe that's something that you want, but I still want to maintain this sound. I still want to get something out of it. I don't want to lose it completely. So that's not really going to be a great option for me. So the first thing I'm going to do is just a very basic static sounding, and let me make sure this is turned on, EQ. So you can see what we've done is we're cutting significantly the fundamental, which is here, as well as, that first or second overtone. So what you see in the background, the red, that's actually what's coming out of labs because we have something lower in the bass. So on and off already, this makes a significant difference. And you're like, great, I'm pretty much all the way there, right? Except that these parts now sound extremely disjunct. So we're gonna have to figure out how to blend those in a little bit better. But anyway, we have already thinned out the sound pretty considerably, but now these two things sound like they're coming from different places. The reason why I did this big cut here, it's not a major cut, but at like 1.5K, is that for the actual strings, the real strings, that's a significant part of the sound and something that cuts through for the human ear. I left the high end alone because the labs, these natural strings, they don't have a lot of natural high end. So I need to try to get a little bit of that out of my synth patch. So from there, I'm gonna now do a little bit more dynamic stuff. So I'm gonna focus in on those same ranges here in the TDR Nova. You can see we have 3 bands, and I am gonna bring that hiss down just a little bit, but notice that I've left this 2 to 5K, maybe like even 2 to 10K range pretty much untouched. So that's just gonna come through. That's gonna, again, try to interact a little bit more with what we have going on here in the labs. So let's take a look at it and listen. And then we'll do a little bit with the old on-off. So again, you can hear how much we're thinning out and pulling away from the sound. The next thing that gets added on is soothe. Here we have our settings. It's pretty much flat in terms of the frequency spectrum. I've pulled this down because I don't want soothe to react super strong to this range yet again. So let's take a quick listen. And bypassed. And back in. It's supposed to be very subtle. It's more of an energy thing more than anything else. Now let's bring it back in with the labs again. So you can hear the way that it can really just cut through the main strings. And that's really what it's all about. And then after listening, I just felt like the high end was still a little bit too harsh. And remember, when I was doing it, I had that original patch that I was working with. So it was actually kind of darker sounding, but still, I then brought in just another Pro Q just to take off a little bit from the high end. Which I thought was necessary and did definitely help it fit a little bit. Now we get into the stage where you're going to be like, why are you doing this? So I do some compression and some limiting. And the main reason is I wanted to be able to go into this patch and bring down the decay time on the reverb as much as possible, to bring down the decay time, to bring down the release. So if I compress and I limit my sound, it's not going to have that long tail at the end where there's energy that's happening, but you can't even hear it as a listener. So I wanted to just kind of fuse that reverb to the sound in hopes that then the reverb tail from what's going on in Diva can basically serve as the reverb tail for those natural strings too. What we could do, if we wanted to, obviously, is turn the reverb off in Diva and process this as a group with a different reverb. That would work too, but this is another technique you can use and it saves you a processor. Okay, so we have our Kotelnikov in. So really just listen to the way the tail is going to be brought up here. So there you go. I could probably even bring this release time, make that a little bit quicker. Yep, I'm good with that. And then we're going into a limiter, so this is obviously going to bring the volume up. So that's really the significant part. And now I should be able to do a better job of balancing these two things. So what you're going to notice, or what I'm hoping that you notice, and we'll definitely hear this at the end when we turn everything on and off, is that when I solo on and off here, even when I turn this volume down a little bit, we can really hear a significant difference, but we never lose the organic sound of what's going on in the strings. So even though this seems like it's very much a mixing tutorial, which in a lot of ways it is, but this also has to do with the production, so that when you're hearing this back and you're doing this in real time, you're realizing, oh, okay, I have space for more things that I can use. And that's what this is all about here, especially in more dense sort of music. So, all right, let's go ahead and just look at the final couple stages. Because we've done so much compression and limiting, it brought up the low end a little bit in the signal. So I just got rid of that because our main strings are serving that role. And then the other thing I did, and this is purely kind of a mixing thing, I've just brought the width up a little bit because this is such like a brighter sound, I can get away with it. And then I panned it over slightly to the right to compensate for the higher strings occupying more of the left from the labs. So with everything in together now, we can listen to it in balance. There's that sizzle on top. Now the crazy part is going to be when I turn all of this off and we listen back to it, I think we're going to like the way it sounds. Well, not a lot because of how fast that sound is cutting off, but if I had a longer release, we'd probably like the overall tonality of it. The issue is, it's just how much space that it's taking up. So it's gonna be way too full. We won't have really room for anything else like a bass sound to come through. So that's kind of the main crux to all of this. So again, let's turn it off. And you can hear when it goes out, but it's in that exact same frequency range. So that's not doing a whole lot for me. I still want to build up that range, but I want to do more. And that is why we have all this processing. So let's turn it back on again. And on. Turn it down just a little bit more. And notice what it sounds like when we take it out now. Significant. You can hear the way it releases at that same time too. And cut. Just never lose those strings. You know, even when this is in, that sound is still carried through. And obviously in a mixing stage, we would want to do more to massage these things into place. But as a starting point, this is really good. And this is a great example of taking a patch, thinning it out, but still fitting it in. And that's the whole point of this video. So hopefully this has been of some use to you. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.